Democrats and Republicans agree on one thing. James Comey is guilty of politicizing the FBI and meddling in the 2016 election. In your eyes, he may be guilty too of self-righteousness, self-regard, and the inappropriate production of a petty, cash-for-gossip revenge attack on President Trump. But no one is above the law, even James Comey. So tonight we ask, is he guilty of federal crimes? In a moment, top lawyers for the prosecution and defense go head-to-head in this Next Revolution special as we put James Comey on trial. Evening, everyone, and welcome to this special edition of the Next Revolution. I'm Steve Hilton, and I'm joined live in New York by the best legal team on television, standing by to cut through the spin and politics and focus on the three areas where there are grounds to believe that James Comey may have broken the law: his handling of the Clinton email investigation, his role in leaks of confidential government information, and the actions he took in connection with that infamous Russia dossier. As we investigate the charges, let us know what you think at NextRevFNC and at Steve Hilton X. You might see your comments on the bottom of the screen, and we'll read your verdicts later in the show. Now, let's meet the legal teams. Here for the prosecution, co-host of The Five, former prosecutor Kimberly Guilfoyle, and Fox News legal analyst Gregg Jarrett. For the defense, former U.S. attorney who worked at the Department of Justice with James Comey, Guy Lewis, and former United States Department of Justice Assistant Chief Deputy Ron Bamieh. And over here at the other table are our legal analysts who I'll be going to for details on all of the charges: former U.S. Attorney Kendall Coffey and trial attorney Harmeet Dhillon. Okay, let's get right to the first set of possible charges against James Comey involving his handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. The charges we're talking about are obstruction of justice and perjury. So let's get some insight now from Kendall Coffey about those charges, and then we'll debate them. Kendall.
Well, Steve, perjury is pretty well known. The traditional elements are a knowingly false statement under oath in a proceeding, whether it be before Congress, a grand jury. Obstruction is more open-ended, and it's one of the prosecutor's best friends. Traditionally, the elements include falsification of documents concealing evidence or making a false statement. But it also has a broader category of interfering with the proper administration of law. The key to obstruction is showing a corrupt intent. What would have been an improper purpose of James Comey? Well, consider that he's recently said that in October 2016, he was considering the political presidential inevitability of Hillary Clinton as a factor in a decision he made.
About that investigation?
About that. Was he, in fact, influenced or as a factor considering Clinton's inevitability in July 2016 when he, in a highly irregular fashion, shut down the Clinton email investigation?
Well, you've set it out for us. Those are the potential charges there: perjury, obstruction of justice. Now, let's remember that we're not interested in anyone's opinion about James Comey. What we're interested in is whether or not he broke the law. Kimberly, those charges relating to the Clinton investigation.
It's very interesting because we're beginning to see a lot of the facts come out. We have his statements in front of Congress. We have now, of course, statements in the book that is about to be released. We also have the IG's investigation. We won't really know for sure, and I want to point this out to the viewers, whether or not he committed these crimes until that report is completed and released. So based on what we know now, we know that this was an individual that specifically seemed to have an intended purpose in an outcome. He said that he made the decision after speaking to Hillary Clinton, but there's investigation reports saying that, in fact, he had already predetermined the outcome as to whether or not she had broken the law. To me, I think that's very interesting because there's a tremendous inconsistency there. Did he make knowingly a false statement when he made that assertion and said that he waited? And why, in fact, were her aides given immunity? It was almost to help push the intended outcome along to get to a certain determination.
So, Gregg, before the defense get a chance to challenge the arguments, what would you add to the case against James Comey in relation to the Clinton email investigation on the specific charges there of perjury and obstruction?
The evidence against Hillary Clinton was powerful, overwhelming evidence under a variety of statutes that she broke the law. And if James Comey cleared her for political reasons, that's obstruction of justice. That's a corrupt intent. And I find it very curious in his book that on the reopening of the Hillary Clinton case, he admits that politics was influencing him. That leads me to believe that it influenced his original decision to exonerate her. I don't know how in the world you write an exoneration statement 2 months before you even interview her.
That's the perjury point, isn't it? That he said that it wasn't written until the interview, but actually it turns out that it was...
It was his testimony for the House Judiciary.
On the obstruction, a lot of people have pointed to the lack of a grand jury being impaneled, subpoenas and so on. Could you talk to those points a little?
Yeah, I think it's very telling because, again, it really goes towards almost like a goal, an ideological goal and a predetermination that Hillary Clinton was going to become president of the United States. And why would you not talk to the people, the aides, the people that were involved with her right away from the beginning? Why wasn't an impartial grand jury and panel to get to the actual truth of the matter? Why ahead of time were her aides, people who would have been directly involved and acting in concert with her, given immunity?
So those two things,
like
let's just be very... I want to be really forensic and precise tonight on this question of breaking the law. Those two actions, not impaneling the jury and immunity for the aides, how is that a crime?
Comey said in his very public statement that there was evidence of potential violation of the criminal statutes. That should have been enough to refer it to DOJ and impanel a grand jury to decide. But then he leaps to the conclusion, but no reasonable prosecutor would ever bring such a case, which is rank speculation. I interviewed 5 former FBI top officials. They all said that what Comey did was wrong. And it's not up to him to be a prosecutor. The FBI does investigations.
So it may have been wrong. What we're trying to establish is whether it was illegal. What's your response to the charges there that what he did in relation to the Clinton investigation could have broken the law in relation to perjury and obstruction?
Kimberly, I think, makes a terrific point. Her first point is we need to know the facts. We need more facts. We need more information. And that's where really I come down because, look, I'll be the first one to tell you, Steve, there are some procedures here, having been at the Department of Justice for a long, long time, having tried a number of big cases, national cases and investigations. I saw some things here that I didn't quite understand, and I still don't understand. For example, why is the FBI director himself taking over the case, announcing a declination, and not interacting with the DOJ? In my experience, I've never seen that. But Kimberly's point is well taken. I would like to know why. Who else was involved in those decisions? What's the paper trail that would lead...
But can I just focus you on this question of obstruction? Do you think... Well, the two questions, obstruction and perjury. Let's take perjury first, actually. A lot of people have been very focused on that. He said that that he only made the decision to exonerate her after the interview, but there are documents that show that the exoneration decision was being prepared before that. Is that perjury, the statement there?
Well, first of all, now it's 3-on-1. Thank you, Guy. I really appreciate that. I'll tell you why all 3 of you guys are wrong here in a second. It's not perjury, number one, because everybody talks about perjury and we all think, oh, God, look, this guy said something, seems false, that's perjury. Perjury is a real tough crime to prosecute. As somebody who's done it and defended it, it's really hard to prove. First of all, drafting an opinion is a lot different than making a decision.
But sorry to cut you off, but like, people can't understand if they really were interested in learning from the interview why the exoneration was prepared beforehand.
Well, regardless of why it was prepared beforehand, and people don't understand, you're asking whether you can prosecute them for something. So whether they understand or don't understand doesn't really matter. Whether the question is, could they prove it? And the answer would be no. Because anytime you're drafting a memo, and I could say to anybody, look, I think X, and this is what my opinion is going to be, but I'm going to wait to find out until we have the interview with Hillary done before I issue my decision.
But the perjury charge is about what he said to Congress.
Right, and he said to Congress he hadn't decided. He didn't say he hadn't drafted an opinion.
And you're saying that proving that he was lying then is going to be
Proving that he's lying is almost impossible.
Okay.
And then
That's
also,
a tough charge.
Okay, you all agree.
Perjury is a tough charge.
one for the good guys. Let's just keep
there you go.
scoreboard here, Steve, that we can put that up.
Let's go to the obstruction point, because all the way in which the investigation was carried out, not impaneling all the points Kimberly and Gregg made, not impaneling the grand jury, the failure to get warrants to search. There was a whole set of things that would normally have been expected to happen that didn't happen. Does that add up to obstruction?
Right, and so the basic argument I would make on something like this would be this, and I'd break it down even simpler, like cops and crooks, right? Cops all the time do investigations and make thousands of mistakes. Not that they're not trying their hardest, not that they're not trying to get to the truth, not that they're incompetent, but they're people. They make mistakes. So any investigation is ripe full of lots of mistakes all the time. And in this case, when we look at Comey and his position, he's on the cop side. He's not on the prosecution side. Okay, he's not the prosecutor. He's not the one who's going to file charges. He can't. The U.S. Attorney's Office has to do it. So if I was defending this, we would do the some other dude did it defense. And the other dude being the Attorney General's office and the President Obama. They ran the show. They could have prosecuted him if they could have prosecuted Hillary if they wanted to. Matter of fact,
it's not the prosecution; it's the way it was conducted.
It doesn't matter how the investigation is conducted.
But that's what you're not claiming that President Obama directed the way that the FBI.
I'm not claiming anything. I'm saying I have a credible argument to believe that since to give immunity to any witness, that has to come from DOJ. That can't come from the FBI directly. DOJ has to approve that. So it's not like he's by himself saying, hey, here's an immunity agreement. No, that's not the way it works. So
if you can be the head of an investigation and obstruct it yourself.
Right.
If you are making decisions for a corrupt purpose. That's the language of the obstruction statute.
And just so that everyone understands that, because when, to a layperson, that word corrupt means, money changing hands. That's not the legal definition of corrupt, is it?
Corrupt is actually defined in 5 different ways under the statute. Lie, threat, bribe.
Let's hear what they are. Go on.
Lie, threat, bribe, concealing evidence, destroying documents. Those are the examples in the statute, but there are others. Clearing somebody for a political reason and ignoring the law would also qualify as a corrupt purpose.
Yes.
It's the equivalent of
but nobody was cleared. The statute of limitations didn't even run until after Trump was in office. So nobody has been cleared of anything. Anybody could have picked up that investigation at DOJ. Anybody could have followed through with a prosecution. I think on some charges the statute of limitations still exists. So when you say that he ended the investigation or that he stalled it, well, maybe. And if that was the case, then why didn't somebody else pick it up?
I don't think
but I think this is very telling. I mean, let's be honest. This was James Comey's show. Okay, he was the one running the investigation. He was the one deciding when he shouldn't have improperly whether or not their charges should be brought, that no reasonable prosecutor. So what I'm saying is there is a trail of corrupt intent from beginning to end that you can run the thread.
He doesn't have the authority to decide.
Why did he not, why he issued they weren't able to issue subpoenas to be able to gather evidence for Congress to be able to get it? Why such a delay in being able to obtain necessary items to show before items were destroyed with bleach bit and a hammer, destruction of evidence in a case? He should have right away gone in and made sure that they had those items, the ability to get them before there was enough time to destroy them. That stripped the American people of justice in this case, and he was calling the shots, and that's how I believe he showed corrupt intent and obstructed justice.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there. The audience will be able to make up their minds. We need to take a break right now, but when we come back, we'll look at charges related to leaking and lying to Congress. Our in-depth analysis is just beginning. The trial of James Comey, a Next Revolution special, continues in a moment. Welcome back to this Next Revolution special, the trial of James Comey. Comey himself has admitted deliberately leaking memos of his meetings with President Trump. Now, that may be unethical, but is it illegal? Here's Harmeet Dhillon. She's going to tell us more about this particular charge, about the leaking of the memos.
Sure. Steve, there are a couple of different statutes that could apply. One of these statutes holds that where you're a government official and you come into classified information and then you remove the documents with the intention of keeping them off site and you don't have authority to do that, that's one type of a crime, and that can be punishable for up to 5 years in prison. And then there's a second type of crime where you're somebody in a position of trust. It could be an employee or a contractor, and you also remove documents, but this is more like an embezzlement or a theft. You do it without knowledge you conceal. And then in this particular statute, you have to have the intent to deprive the owner of the property permanently from the use. And so in that one, there's a lot of controversy over the terms and whether that gets into whistleblowers. So there's quite a bit of law on that second
So which one do you think is most relevant to this question of the memos that Comey himself created in order to be leaked?
I think it is the first, because he is an official of the United States government. And so that is the statute that has been used to prosecute other high government officials. It has been alleged against Hillary Clinton, David Petraeus, and other high officials. That's the more likely statute.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Gregg, Jarrett, you lead off on this one. The documents. It may have been wrong, may have been unethical, may have been underhand, but was it illegal?
Absolutely. In the federal regulations, Code of Federal Regulations, and the Privacy Act, as well as the Federal Records Act, anything that's in the course and scope of your employment is government property. And every FBI agent signs a document that says when you leave government, all of that is the government's to remain behind you or not to take it with you. Comey took it with him. 7 presidential memos.
Does it make any difference that he created the documents himself?
No.
No.
Everything you do in the course and scope of your employment is government property. He was acting as the FBI director when he spoke to the president. He wrote about their conversations. It's clearly government property. And he stole that government property, including, according to Senator Grassley, 4 classified documents, which would make him just as guilty as Hillary Clinton.
Are you referring to the memos or something else?
I'm referring to the 7 presidential memos.
Right. Kimberly, anything to add?
Yeah, so that's not, just because he is the author and the one that produced it and created it doesn't mean that then he has some ownership right or entitled to be able to remove it. I totally agree with Gregg. I think this is actually one of the strongest points, and there's really compelling evidence to show that he, in fact, knowingly leaked and also lied about it when he testified and said, no, he didn't leak any documents or information under oath. But nevertheless, he did.
Yes.
So this is a problem for him.
He did. I mean, look.
And shared it with a friend.
Try and defend him against this. I mean, he admitted that he did this.
Yeah, Guy.
Yeah, well, this is a tougher one, I think. Look, the question I would have, twofold. One, was the information classified? I think he testified under oath before Congress that he didn't actually take the memos themselves, but he created a non-classified version, according to his testimony, that he then turned over to his pal, who was a law professor.
Daniel Richman.
Who then leaked them to the New York Times.
But is it not the case that I've read, I think it was Jonathan Turley who made the point that actually whether or not it's classified is not the point. It's the fact that it's unauthorized. That's what's against the law.
1924.
Well, another interesting point, certainly that Comey's lawyers would likely raise in this situation. Comey is a person that can classify and declassify information as a head of an agency. Now, that's an executive order that is in place and was in place when he did. Now, I haven't heard this.
I would beg to differ.
Just let the defense in full respond.
Okay, well, I would respond, first of all, thank you, Guy, for joining the team finally. I'm glad to have you aboard. I would first also, let's talk about the leaks. First of all, we have a long-standing tradition in this country, which the Supreme Court has upheld, that we're not going to prosecute leakers. They did so in a DHS case where a guy came forward and said, hey, they're removing all the marshals from the planes.
By saying that, are you saying that you're conceding that he could be prosecuted? Now you're
No, I'm saying he can't. Because the law is pretty clear on this, because we have this protection. We want to encourage this behavior, actually, because when we think that somebody's being a tyrant, doing something unethical, jeopardizing the government or the citizens of the government, we want people to come forward and leak information.
But this doesn't qualify as a whistleblower.
Yes, it does.
It was after the fact.
Just a second.
After he was fired.
I think that was what Harmeet was referring to, which is that there are aspects of this in the second type of statute where you could be considered whistleblowing. I think that's what you're referring to, but not the first. It's pretty obvious. It's pretty direct, isn't it? That his property was...
The property issue, as Guy pointed out there, he said under oath that he took his memos, he took out the classified information, he summarized them, and he provided them to his buddy. All right. So, and as he would have the ability to do so, he said they're not classified documents.
Yeah, but sorry, the content, not the marking, is what defines classification.
And even the content, though, if the content is about an illegal conversation that the president may have had with me, are you telling me that he could not provide that information out to the public? He could. There's no doubt in my mind he could. Well, matter of fact, we would want him to.
The one person who has actually read those 7 memos is Trey Gowdy, who said that is the best Exhibit A for the defense of President Trump than it is for the actions of Comey.
Yeah. And see, the problem I have with all of this, and the counter to all of this would be that what we're doing here is we're taking political events and we're taking people's political perspective and we're trying to squeeze them into violations of federal statutes. And when we do that,
when you
we're mixing
steal
things
government,
that we're not.
Well, the reason for doing that, I think, is that it's very important that the system as a whole sends a message that nobody is above the law, including law enforcement officials. And if he did do things that broke the law, then that's something that's important to discuss.
My question would be, because as I understand it, Comey has now turned over his memos to Bob Mueller. Now, we know Bob Mueller can refer matters up to another jurisdiction for action. Bob Mueller surely would be able to look at these memos and tell us whether or not they contain classified information or not. And to me, that would be a telltale sign that if he did indeed leak classified information.
But is it,
Mueller,
I just want to focus on this point about whether the classified nature of it is the legal point or not.
I mean, you can remove a label or a header, and we saw some of that in terms of the back and forth with Abedin and Hillary Clinton, and then forwarding to her, her email, etc. What I think is compelling here is the fact that I don't think he has fair claim to any kind of whistleblower. There is a public interest exception where you feel that you must do so, but this was after he became a private citizen. He knowingly took information that he had no right to be able to remove as a government official. It belongs to the United States government, the American people, and with specific intention, he handed it to his friend to get out there, to Daniel Richman, the Columbia professor. So he's not going to have whistleblower protection. He was outside of the job already, and he tried to use a conduit, someone to try to say, though I didn't hand it directly, and give it to the New York Times. That's what he did.
I would disagree with you on that. There's no statute on when you can be a whistleblower. There's no time limitation on that. That's a very narrow interpretation of that statute. The case law is pretty clear. We're going to encourage people to be whistleblowers. Matter of fact, Clarence Thomas wrote an opinion that we need to have these people out there in order to protect the government and to protect the United States people.
Arguments on both sides. As before, you'll decide. Coming up next, we'll take a close look at James Comey's ties to the infamous Russia dossier and debate the possible legal consequences of that after this break. Welcome back to the Trial of James Comey, this Next Revolution special. We've looked at Comey's role in the Clinton investigation and at his leaks related to the Trump investigation. The next set of potential charges relate to the infamous Trump-Russia dossier. Now, 2 congressional committees have already found that the FBI knew the dossier was largely fabricated. Indeed, James Comey himself described it as salacious and unverified. The FBI also knew that it was paid for in part by the Clinton campaign and compiled by someone with a bias against Donald Trump. The FBI knew they needed the dossier to spy on the Trump campaign, and so they relied on it to obtain the FISA warrant anyway. Kendall and Harmeet have more on the charges here. This is so controversial, this Russia dossier, but again, let's focus on the potential laws that may have been broken. Kendall.
Well, I'm going to let Harmeet talk about the abuse of power. But certainly the question of making a submission using the most salacious, frankly, absurd information from political opposition research raises not only questions about misuse of power, but whether there's a fundamental falsification. And that can implicate all the laws about false statement as well as obstruction of justice. So we don't know the details of what was in that submission. What we know, though, is it was a submission to the FISA court, Foreign Intelligence
Surveillance. With James Comey's name on it.
With James Comey's name on it, of the likes that no prosecutor that I know of would have ever signed off on a submission like that.
Yes, and it was done repeatedly. And one of the statutes focuses on the rights of the person whose rights are being deprived, and that is Section 242, which talks about depriving somebody's rights, civil rights really, under color of law. And so where a government official knowingly and intentionally violates somebody's rights, and here that could include submitting a request for a warrant to the FISA court repeatedly, but omitting key evidence that the judge would want to know, and then that would be a violation of Carter Page's rights to privacy and Fourth Amendment rights and other rights as well.
And there's a perjury argument here too, isn't there? About the way that the way that all this information was presented and described to the public.
Well, because it's inherently verified. It's sworn to when the submissions are made. And if you're using information that is not reliable and you're not making the appropriate disclosures to the court, that can obviously be a very serious thing.
Well, serious? Again, is it illegal? Kimberly, this whole dossier has caused so much debate. But again, let's focus on whether the charges we heard there.
Yeah, I think there is a tremendous abuse of power here, and especially, can you imagine someone who takes an oath to, uphold the law and is supposed to do a fair and impartial investigation? Nevertheless, he proffered a document that he knew was largely uncorroborated, that was paid for by the Clinton campaign and by an individual that put it together, that had really no substantial basis in fact, credibility whatsoever. And James Comey made the decision to put that in front of a court, of a judge, and obtain a FISA warrant to then do surveillance on the Trump campaign and on the building, suggesting that perhaps there was some kind of Russian collusion. Who does that as the head of the FBI? I think this is one of the more egregious examples of his abuse of power and the fact that he wanted a specific intended outcome.
And does it meet the legal threshold for committing a crime?
Oh, absolutely. Major fraud, conspiracy, obstruction by deceiving a federal judge, abuse of power, all of these are crimes, because what you're really doing is you're deceiving a judge and you're concealing material evidence. The only reference to who paid for the dossier is buried in a footnote, and it is so opaque you can't tell what it really means. That's deception. That's lying to a judge. That's a crime.
That sounds pretty cut and dried.
Well, let's take it out of the FISA court, because I'm unaware.
Take what out of the FISA?
Let's take the question about submitting false information, because this is department lawyers and prosecutors. Like all lawyers, we look to precedent. We look to cases that we've investigated and prosecuted before. And I'm unaware, again, having done this a long, long time, I'm unaware of any prosecution in the FISA court context. Now, much better to look at it in terms of what Ron does every day, which is defend and file these kind of motions in state and federal court. Officers all the time submit affidavits and search warrant applications to judges, state and federal. And defense lawyers all the time challenge those based on both omissions and false or reckless information. And again, it's a process whereby the motions are filed, there's a hearing, and the sides testify under oath and it's challenged.
But this is a secret court.
I was going to say, I'd like
there's no defense there to present the other side.
Well, 1 second here, because yes, it is. The way they got the warrant was a secret court. However, we know that now people have been charged, and one is defending, Manafort. And so he has the opportunity, when the time comes, if any information gleaned from any of these search warrants came from any affidavit that referenced the dossier, which I hate calling it the dossier, but that's what everybody's calling it, so we'll call it the dossier, to challenge the contents of that warrant and traverse the warrant, squash the warrant, whatever he wants to do, and those facts will come out. But see, we're talking about a lot of facts that, frankly, I think people know a little about, but don't know a lot about, because I will guarantee you the affidavit, the person who signed the affidavit to say, please authorize the search warrant, was not James Comey. I'll guarantee his name's on it because he was head of the FBI, and he's...
Well, doesn't he therefore have some legal responsibility?
Well, according to the Intelligence Committee of the House, it was Comey who signed it. Sally Yates signed one of them. Rod Rosenstein signed one of them. Okay, they're vouching for the authenticity of these documents.
You're conflating a couple of issues here. The way it works, the way an affidavit works, is an officer has to say, Officer X went to, or FBI agent X says, hey, I went out here, I obtained this information, ABC, this is why I believe this crime has been committed. And then it goes to Comey and he says, okay, based on your affidavit, I'm going to sign off on it, go ahead and submit it to the court. It has to go through a U.S. attorney, Rothstein. He says, okay, based on what I see in here, I'll sign off on it. Then it goes to the court. So the person swearing under penalty of perjury is not James Comey.
Okay, well, let's leave it like that. Maybe hang on a second. It's not just Comey, it's a whole bunch of them.
Well, of course it is. Absolutely, in various steps. But the facts are that James Comey is one of the people, one of the individuals, you just stated yourself, that in fact had to put this forward and proffer it to say, let's get the information.
All right, sorry, Ron, we can have to leave it there. I'm really sorry. We're out of time on that. I know. I'm sorry. Are you going to win the case? If we had more time, you'd win, I know. When we come back, we take a look ahead at what could be next for James Comey. Will he ever face real charges? Don't go away. Welcome back to this Next Revolution special, the trial of James Comey. Well, you've heard the arguments. This is your last chance to let us know your verdicts at NextRev FNC. We'll read them in the next segment. But now I want to get our legal experts' thoughts on what's next for James Comey. Harmeet, we've been discussing this here tonight, the arguments one way or another, but in the real world, what do you think needs to happen?
Well, what needs to happen and what will happen in the real world are probably two different things. But James Comey knows himself very well that some of the things he's been accused of tonight and in the press are things that he's prosecuted other people for. So, for example, Sandy Berger is a figure out of the Clinton's past who actually stuffed documents down his pants in the National Security Archives and then got away with them. And then he was ultimately given a slap on the wrist when James Comey held the position in the Department of Justice that Rod Rosenstein does today. That's in 2004. So he knows people can be prosecuted. He's prosecuted them for doing similar things. But in the real world right now, where we have a attorney general who's recused, we have a deputy attorney general under fire from the president and under pressure from many people to resign or step aside, who would prosecute him? I think the proper place to be prosecuted would be by line attorneys in the Department of Justice and definitely not a special prosecutor. I think what we've seen here historically is that special prosecutors are loose cannons that go in search of crimes and are often overturned on appeal. So I don't think that's a good use of resources.
So let's just explore that. I want the audience to be absolutely clear what you're saying, that if the view is that he has potentially committed crimes, and we've certainly heard that view put here tonight forcefully, if that's the case, then he should be prosecuted. Who exactly should take the lead in making that happen?
Well, it would be somebody in the Department of Justice. Now, a cautionary note here is that what we're seeing is almost an arms race and escalation of the political crime prosecution and process crimes. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing for the country because there can be a line between what you think is the right thing. I think Comey's clearly on the wrong side of it, but the problem is that if you prosecute him, the ante is upped for the tables to be turned in the next administration. I'm not sure that's a great use of our resources.
What's your view?
Well, my view is we're not done collecting the information. And as he goes on this book tour attempting to monetize and cash in on his allegations, there's more things he's going to say that may backfire on him. And what we know is often the fastest, best way to a prosecution is false statement. And one of the surest ways to prove that is when the subject contradicts himself or is contradicted by others. So, for example, Comey comes out and says, yeah, politics was a factor in my decision this October. How does that hold up with other statements we make? And he's not just being contradicted as he gets out there, capitalizing on his book tour, by the President of the United States. LORETTA LYNCH has now come out and directly contradicted one of his accounts. So this saga is to be continued, not just in terms of where the prosecution efforts might go, but the information being generated about Comey and the potential for false statements.
And Andy McCabe has also accused him of lying. And so we've seen in the Inspector General's report that just came out that McCabe's attorneys have said that Comey should not be believed. Comey did authorize him talking to the Wall Street Journal. And there's that. And then you also have Senator Grassley, who has written to Rod Rosenstein, saying, let's talk more about these 7 classified documents, and we want some more details. Did he give them? I don't think it is clear at all that he simply gave an excerpt to his friend. His friend retroactively claimed attorney-client privilege. There's a lot of hinky stuff going on there. We aren't even close to being close to the fact-finding there.
Appreciate your perspectives. Lots more to dig into. Thank you very much. Just time for some thoughts from the table. Let's go around the table. What should happen next? What is it? Just stay here? I suspect you're going to say not much in relation to James Comey in terms of what should happen next.
Well, what should happen next is we should have a lot more light on the situation. I agree with that.
Well, I think I agree
with that. But more importantly here, we should stop mixing politics with prosecution. It's like mixing good whiskey with Coca-Cola. You can do it, but you shouldn't do it.
Well, I think a lot of people's reaction to that would be, well, tell that to the people.
Tell that to James Comey.
Exactly.
Sorry. No, well, you're asking what should happen to him.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we start mixing politics and prosecution, it's just a bad result. We're seeing that with Mueller now. We're seeing it with special counsels in the past. It's just a bad result.
Okay.
So it should stop.
I agree with Harmeet in as much as the department should take the lead on this. I do not want to see another special counsel. This one's costing us a fortune. Clinton's special counsel cost us $70, $80 million, and we got nothing out of it. I think it's a huge waste of money, and I'd like to see it, frankly, shut down.
Okay, Gregg?
Well, I don't think you can put a price tag on justice.
Yes, that's true.
I do think that the Inspector General's report will be very revealing. He is examining closely James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, and others at the FBI, and Bruce Orr at the Department of Justice. So he may find that there is a criminal referral to be had.
So, Kimberly, I think there's so many people are so angry about this whole situation. And they feel like all of the weight of the legal effort has been on one side against President Trump. Whatever you think about what he did or didn't do, or his team, it feels like it's all coming from that direction. Do you think that people will be satisfied that justice has been done if there's nothing coming back on the other side?
No, and can you imagine the President of the United States not being able to have justice and have the due process and have a full and fair and impartial hearing? Right now you see an investigation run amok. And by the way, Gregg, I agree with you. I mean, what is the price of justice? If it is warranted, based on the IG's report, other facts are put forward to suggest that there was wrongdoing, criminal wrongdoing on behalf of James Comey, and we've seen some evidence of it here tonight of some of the possible charges: obstruction of justice, false statements, abuse of power, mishandling government documents, and also using these documents for his own personal gain and profit in a book that he knew that he was going to come out in film rights. I think there's a lot of meat on the bones there, and I think the American people deserve answers to it.
So last quick point, how are we going to get them? What should actually happen next?
DOJ should then have a full investigation and perhaps maybe another Inspector General investigation about it.
And so who's going to make, who people watching tonight feeling frustrated that nothing's going to happen, who should they look to make this happen?
Well, I mean, this is the part that's troublesome.
You said Sessions.
Yes, I think Sessions.
Yeah, you've got the Department of Justice that will essentially be investigating itself. The FBI is part of the Department of Justice. That's like cops investigating cops. It never works. And it's apt to be corrupt 9 times out of 10.
So what should happen?
Second special counsel.
Oh, okay.
So we concur over here.
There we are. Thank you.
Never end.
Thank you so much. Coming up next, you've heard the evidence. It's time for your verdict. Send us your thoughts at NextRevFNC. We'll read them after the break. Welcome back to this Next Revolution special, the trial of James Comey. You've seen the evidence. Let's take a look at what you have to say. Debbie tweets, James Comey presupposed an outcome and made illegal decisions to match his desired result. That makes it crystal clear that his hands are figuratively muddied and dirty. John writes, this is what happens when you manufacture evidence and deceive a FISA court judge. Fake foreign evidence bought and paid for by the DNC through a third-party law firm. Second special counsel coming. Lodovico on Facebook says, he might be guilty on all charges, but proving beyond a reasonable doubt will be the issue. Adam tweeted, Comey is guilty. We know he lied under oath, and we know he exonerated Hillary long before the investigation was over. Vince on Facebook posted, innocent till proven guilty. I look forward to a trial soon. Samantha on Facebook thinks the winner is clear. The prosecution made an excellent case. No doubt in my mind, there you are, Kimberly's happy about that. No doubt in my mind he's guilty. But Robert disagrees. Strong cases on both sides, but the prosecution did not meet the burden of proof. Linda tweeted, standing on its own, the exoneration doc might not be enough for an obstruction charge, but along with other info that we've seen, it appears Comey did obstruct. Thank you so much to all of you for your tweets and Facebook posts. We really appreciate that. We have to take a break now. Final thoughts coming up next. All right, welcome back, everyone. My thanks to our amazing legal team, Kimberly, Gregg, Guy, Ron, Harmeet, Kendall. You can learn more about the Next Revolution by following us at NextRevFNC and at Steve Hilton Next. On next week's show, we've got an exclusive interview with Leonard Leo from the Federalist Society on how President Trump's judicial appointments are helping to defeat the deep state bureaucracy. Look, I know that half of you out there will think that's amazing and half have no idea who Leonard Leo is, but I promise you, all of you need to tune in. Don't watch the James Comey interview. Stay on Fox News Channel with Mark Levin. He's up next. I'm Steve Hilton. See you next Sunday when the Next Revolution will be televised.